I'm going to be talking to you about this painting known as The Umbrellas by the French artist Pierre-Auguste Renoir, which we think he completed in 1885. It's quite a big painting. It's 1.8 meters tall, and so we really feel that we're part of this milling crowd on the Parisian boulevard. If you look to the top right of the painting, you can see the upper stories and the roofs of the apartment blocks so typical of the city. And then to the top left, you get a glimpse of the trees that line these wide boulevards. Most of the top of the painting is filled with the wonderful semicircular shapes of the umbrellas. And so, although the general colour of the painting is quite bright, we assume that it must be raining. The leaves on the trees are still quite bright, quite green, and so we assume maybe that this is a spring shower or an autumn shower rather than the cold rain of winter. But it is the 5 characters in the foreground that really attract our attention, 2 of whom are gazing out towards us. And this is quite unusual. Quite often in a many-figured painting, an artist will make one character look out and make contact with us to draw us in. But to have these 2 gazes out is actually quite disconcerting. But let's start with the group on the right-hand side. A fashionably dressed mother and 2 daughters. The littlest girl in the centre there, clutching onto her hoop and her stick, seems to have come to a kind of dead halt in the crowd as she gazes out at us. Both mother and older sister have a hand clamped on her shoulders, so I think she's going to be kind of hustled on any minute now and told to stop staring at us and at least come under the shelter of the umbrella. As in the confusion of a real crowd, it can be quite difficult to tell which hands and feet belong to which character. I find one of the easiest ways to sort that out is to actually start with the mother's hands. She's wearing very pale, sort of grey turquoise gloves that are buttoned at the wrist with 2 pearls, and she has bracelets on her wrists. So that helps to position her in space. She has a diaphanous tiered skirt with wonderful dabs of turquoise and blue and orange and gold. And that leads down to 1 foot you can see of hers in a buttoned boot, a grey and blue button boot. The older daughter on the right also has button boots, but dark in her case. We can see her left foot, but actually only just the tip of the toes of her right foot, while the little girl in the middle has the barred shoes appropriate to her age. The blue skirt that most people think is actually attached to the mother belongs to the woman behind her, the one who's actually holding her umbrella only half open as she tilts her head up to check the weather by looking up into the sky. The older sister's face remains enigmatic, hidden behind her creamy hat, but that wonderful splash of auburn hair makes a singing contrast with her light blue coat. And that contrast is picked up throughout the rest of the painting in some of the warmer tones of the more distant clothes, the handles of the umbrellas, and then top left, just a little addition that Renoir made. I don't know if you can see this little structure, which might be an advertising post. I think they're called Morris columns, but I'm not 100% certain that's what it is. But what's important about it is it's a lovely little splash of bright orange, which takes your eye back into the picture. On the left-hand side of the painting, the young woman looking out at us is without protection from the weather. She has no hat, she has no umbrella. Some people interpret her expression as tragic, or is it just the face of somebody whose feet hurt and might even be rather damp by now? She seems to be holding her skirts up against the wet pavement, doesn't she? She has a bandbox over her arm. So this is a light basket, often used for carrying hats or maybe, other light pieces of clothing. So that and her quite plain dark costume might lead us to think that she's a milliner's assistant. So she could be out on an errand or maybe making a delivery perhaps. The man behind her, however, he's a bit more ambiguous. He's nicely dressed. He has leather gloves, possibly a top hat. It's hard to be absolutely certain because the umbrella is cutting it off. But where is he looking? Is he looking across the painting at the little family? Maybe it's his family. Maybe he's the missing father. Or is he about to step forward and offer the young woman with the bandbox the shelter of his umbrella? Or are his intentions actually rather more sinister? Now, we've been looking at this painting quite closely, and you may have noticed that actually the 2 sides are really very different and not just in mood. Look at the mother and daughters. They're painted in these lovely soft feathery brush marks. There are no hard contours. Whereas if you look across on the other side, the marks are much smoother, much more elongated. The whole is much more linear and more clearly defined. The fashions seem to be different. On the right-hand side, the mother wears a velvet jacket with a flowery corsage. Her dress, skirt, as I said, is tiered, but you may not have noticed it's actually stretched over quite a big bustle behind her. The littlest girl has a short jacket with 2 rows of buttons down the front, trimmed with a lacy collar and cuffs. Both of them have feathery bonnets, while the older girl, her hat is trimmed with lace. And if you look at her much plainer coat, you can just see her little white handkerchief poking out of her pocket. Whereas the girl on the left, her outfit, even given that she's a humble shop girl, is still, the silhouette is rather different. It's much plainer, it's much slimmer. The sleeves of her jacket are much tighter. It's much tighter around the waist. So it seems as if something has changed. And Renoir was very, very alert to women's fashion, which changed very, very quickly at this point. So usually in his paintings, it's accurate to the time period in which the painting was made. So this would seem to suggest that there is a time lag between the two sides. And in fact, X-rays and infrared reflectography, which allow us to look beneath the surface of a painting, show that the woman on the left has actually been repainted. And originally, she was dressed in a similar fashion to the woman on the right. And she did indeed have a hat, although it wasn't quite the same. It was rather more of a sort of loose beret affair worn on the back of the head. And instead, he's repainted her in this more severe costume, probably of around 1885, and has given her simply a blue hair ribbon and an orange hairpin. So what's going on here? Why do we have this shift? Why is there this difference, and why is it not resolved? And why does there seem to be a time lag between the two sides? Well, the time lag is probably the easiest thing to explain. Having endured years of poverty in the 1870s, by the beginning of the 1880s, Renoir is finally getting a little bit of money. He's getting a sort of circle of collectors and patrons. He's being commissioned for portraits. His dealer, Duruel, is finally able to sell his paintings for a little more. And so at last he's able to travel. And he goes to Italy and North Africa, amongst other places. So this really kind of opens his eyes, but it does mean that he's away from his Paris studio for a number of years. In fact, on his return from Italy, he was able to stay with his friend Cézanne in the south of France, in Provence, and the two of them worked quite closely together in 1882. And so you can see Cézanne's influence, perhaps, on the second phase of painting, because it seems actually that everything but the mother and 2 daughters is part of that later phase. So if you look at the trees, top left, they are quite softly painted, so you do get a sense of perhaps a sort of, breeze in the foliage, or maybe, the rain is just making it move slightly. But if you look closely, you can see that they're not kind of random marks. They are actually just little runs of parallel strokes. But the other thing was that Renoir's landscapes of the 1870s that we think of as the, sort of quintessential Impressionism, landscapes that he might have done largely, although not completely, on the spot, out in the open air, en plein air, were obviously done quite rapidly with a sort of flurry of marks to try and capture a particular moment of weather, of atmosphere, of movement. But by the beginning of the 1880s, he was really starting to feel that he didn't know where to go with that. He famously said he was at a kind of dead end, really. And he was searching for a way to make, to move his work on, to make something with a kind of greater clarity and a sort of more permanent quality. So we'll probably never know really why he didn't resolve the painting, why he didn't actually unify the two halves of the painting. But we can only think that perhaps he was sort of pressured to finish it because it was going into a big Impressionist exhibition in New York in 1886. But whatever the reason, it does give us a wonderful insight into this transitionary phase of Renoir's work.